Welcome back. Let's talk about buttons and how they work in an Android environment. We have two different categories. We have regular buttons and floating action buttons, which are called FABs. Now let's talk about this fancy one, FAB. Whenever you start a new app project, you're probably gonna ask what's the purpose of the app, or what's the user supposed to do inside the app. If we're talking about Gmail, for example, the main action would be to compose a new message, right? Or if it's a calendar app, we need an FAB to create a new entry. If it's Google Maps, the user has to start his journey real quick. If it's a clock app, the user needs to create a new alarm, and so on. You get the idea. This specific action is a core feature of the app that the user often needs, so it has to be right at his fingertips. It must be shown at all times. So that's where the floating action button comes in. It checks all the boxes. Its main property is that it floats above the content in a fixed position, so it's always there. It's always reachable. So FAB, floating action button. In certain apps, when you scroll down, it does hide, but then when you stop, it always pops back up. Now, FABs can take on two shapes, regular and extended. Now, the regular floating button is always placed in the bottom right side of the screen, and I like to place it 32 pixels from the bottom and right edges. Now, the size of the button is 112 by 112, and the icon inside it is 48 by 48. And like I said, the button floats, so that's why it usually has a drop shadow. It's also brightly colored, and the icon is usually pure white, so it's very easy to get. The most common icon is the plus symbol, which usually means create. Create a new email, create a new reservation, a new entry, and so on. Now, there's only one single floating action button, only one single FAB, and that's because usually that's the most important thing inside the app. So please don't have more than one FAB. Now, here's another thing that I discourage. It's the use of multiple actions hidden inside an FAB. Now, this animation, sure, it's lovely, it makes an impact, but when I've used it, I've seen fewer clicks, and that's because people aren't used to all of this. So please, again, avoid it. Now, the next type of floating action button is the extended one. Where the regular one was limited to a single icon and fairly small, the extended FAB can also have a text label or text and an icon. And you can make it as wide as you want, but the recommended height is 96 pixels. Now, extended FABs are great for actions that require a text label. Sometimes an icon simply doesn't cut it, it's not clear enough. Now, these are also used to grab the user's attention by their sheer size, and that's because they can be quite chunky. And like the regular ones, the extended ones float above the content, so it's quite clear that the user is supposed to click on it. Now, a good example is a checkout button. Sure, you may have an icon for the cart in the top right side, but that may get lost. When you see an extended floating action button, you're not gonna miss it. So obviously when you want to finalize an order, just tap it. That's a much better experience. Let's move on to the next category, regular buttons. Now, these come in many shapes and sizes, but they're fixed to a certain position inside the app, as you're gonna see in a moment. So that's the main difference between them and FABs. FABs float about and they're typically in the bottom right side. Classic buttons can be absolutely everywhere. Now, there are 5 types of regular buttons, but you'll probably only use about 3. So it's filled, outline, and text. This screenshot shows you exactly what you need to know. Basically, you choose the button type based on its importance. Now, in this case, what does the company want from the user? What's the most valuable action? It's add to cart. That's why the filled button is here, because it stands out the most. It grabs your attention. Now, you may say, hey, you know what, buy now might make the company more money. But typically, people add several products to a cart before checking out. That's why the focus is on add to cart. This is what most people expect to see. So it's quite clear that this is the key action, so that's why it gets the filled button. And the secondary action, buy now, gets an outline button. This is also called a ghost button, and that's because it doesn't have a body. No body, ghost. Fun stuff. Now the third type of button is pure text. In this case, it does feature an icon as well. Ask a question. Again, this action is way less important than the other two, so it needs to be less shouty. It doesn't need to stand out as much. So that's how you think about buttons. This is called the hierarchy principle, and really it's nothing all that complicated. You think about their level of importance and then you move down. So it's filled, outline, and then text. Now moving back to the material guide, in its third form, I really don't like tonal buttons. I think they're used for the fringe cases, so I really don't want to bother you with them. And the final one, the elevated button, is often confused by beginners with the extended FAB. So my advice, don't focus on these other two, focus on the three I mentioned and you'll be good to go. Now when we'll design stuff, you'll see that we won't stop and wonder, oh, is this an FAB or is this an elevated button? No. What we're gonna focus on, is it lovely to look at, is it easy to use, and so on. Now overall, these are buttons in a nutshell. The second part of the equation here, there's always a rank to consider inside any screen. So there's the most likely action, something like add to cart, but there may be other things like more info or compare items that are less important, but they're still there. So based on this thought process, you can decide how big of an impact your buttons should make. This requires a bit of analysis regarding the app and the current screen and circumstances, but we're gonna talk about all of that in this course. Right now, that's it. Let's take a moment and I'm gonna see you in 1 second. Thank you so much.